Mercurial girl here, and today I want to talk about your Saturn return. So, if you have never heard this term, Saturn is the planet in the sky that in astrology represents hard lessons. It's kind of like our old wise teacher. It wants us to learn things so that we can reap the benefit of like hard work and responsibility. Saturn is traditionally ruled by Capricorn, which Capricorn people kind of exude this energy already. But for each of us, we all have a Saturn return, and wherever Saturn was in your birth chart, so that moment you took your first breath of air here and you got that little birth chart soul screenshot, you want to look at what house Saturn lands in, and it's going to take 29 and a half years to make its way around the chart back to the place it was when you were born. So once it does that, that is considered your very first Saturn return. Now, the fun, like nerdy side thing about this is when we think about practically what happens at age like 29 going into 30, it's a huge shift from going out of your 20s where you learn all kinds of chaotic lessons to kind of a more stable, potentially, or at least like kind of valuing your sanity a little bit more that comes when you're in your 30s versus all the trial and error of the 20s. And then if you look to age like 59 to 60, this is so commonly when people have that midlife crisis where they're not really sure what to do. They're not quite at the age of retirement, and there can be this like antsiness of wanting to kind of rebuild and restart their life in different ways. And that is so on brand to astrology. I love it. The final one, if you can make it to that 89 years old, I honestly haven't like really thought this out, but I do work in nursing homes and have since like age 15. And I am sure I have witnessed some people on their third Saturn return kind of losing their minds. But Saturn returns don't always have to mean something like completely chaotic. I just think Saturn, when it comes back around, it wants to see if you've taken the hints of the lessons that have been taught within the cycle. So I think for a lot of us, if we've kind of been resistant to themes and patterns that have come up again and again in our life, there can be this sort of shift that can happen rather quick when your Saturn return comes. It can kind of shake things up and realign you with what you are here to do. So that can either be a really beautiful time of like transformation and kind of feeling like things are all starting to come together, or Saturn return can kind of like knock you on your ass and teach you completely in the most difficult way what needs to fall away from your life. So I'm going to share my Saturn return because I just finished it, and while it's fresh in my mind, I thought I would share some insight on what came up for me personally. My Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius, so being an Aquarius Saturn just means that the Saturn is being charged by an air sign. So there's a lot more of kind of thinking things through. It's a little bit more of a mental energy behind the sign. And because Aquarius is a fixed sign, I think there's a rather like stubborn nature to kind of learn the lessons. Aquarius can get kind of set in their ways a little bit more easily than some signs. And it takes a lot of convincing to shift. So I feel like for Saturn return in that sign, I was shown a lot of the ways that I think about things and how I'm a little rigid and breaking some of my beliefs based on my life experiences. I think a lot of that came up with the undertones of the sixth house. So for me, Saturn landed in my sixth house when I was born. And so my Saturn return, it returned to that sixth house. The sixth house is all about routine, daily structure, mind and body health, being of service to other people, and kind of the balance between self and others. And all of these themes 100% came out in my Saturn return. So a year before starting my Saturn return, I knew I was like getting burned out from constantly working. So I really was feeling intuitively that I needed to take a rest. I have been working and hustling since I started working when I was 16. I have been like a full-time hard worker, like very rarely taking off. I used to brag about that. Now I understand that that is not such a brag to be just like going all the time. But I could feel it, I knew it, and I'm so glad I kind of listened to that hunch, because really the year right up before my Saturn return, I spent it traveling across the country. I went to 28 different states, lived out of my car with my husband and my dog, and we really got to see who we were without always having work as the answer, to just like run to and to define ourselves based on what our job title is. And I think for me, that was like the hardest thing in the freaking world. I had so many shadows come up around my sense of self-worth. I really realized it was very hard for me to relax and rest. I would be in like the middle of the woods trying to like organize sticks. I could not chill. I had zero chill. I had to learn so many lessons around that. And I'm so glad I kind of like took that year and made it what it was, because going into my Saturn return, which started February of 2023, or 2022, and 2021 was the year I did all of my traveling. I really already had kind of been humbled on work-life balance in some ways. So I think as I started going back into work, I had a better understanding of the tipping point between too much and just enough, where I'm putting in hard work. I'm trying to, go after the goals and things that I have, but I'm also being very aware of where the tipping point is, that my mental health really starts to take a toll because I'm overdoing it. And I think all of my self-care lessons I've learned along the way in my 20s really had to be applied kind of more strictly, looking at kind of being able to bounce from being busy to being able to also go into a nurturing mode, not just like a numbing out mode because of tired. So I've really learned a lot on kind of integrating all of my self practices. And I think for me, it's kind of like busy or shut down. And I've had to kind of ebb and flow with busy and taking care of myself. Also not overextending myself out to other people to the point of going into that kind of codependency addiction where I'm way overgiving. I don't even know where I start and other people begin. That was definitely another theme of my life that came up. And I also think I really stepped into kind of a new aspect of career, which Saturn really rules like what we're really good at when we put hard work and discipline in. And I love sharing spirituality. And I think my spiritual like teachings and jobs related to not just my physical therapy side, but also the side of myself that loves to explore astrology and the mystical and energy work, I've been able to kind of tie in both worlds smoothly. And I think my Saturn return really pointed to kind of trial and error on figuring out the fine line and balance between those things too. So wherever you are in age, you always want to look to those years. You can always time travel back and kind of see what was going on in the year of your Saturn return. If you've already had one. If you have not, really kind of think of that as being a point where a lot of things can shift. You want to notice the cycles that keep coming up. So if you keep ending up in the exact same types of relationships, or you keep having the same discontentment around certain areas of your life, notice those as a pattern, because I guarantee those themes are coming up so that there is something that is being reflected on inwardly, maybe even released from inside to help you ebb and flow with more what your nature and true alignment is supposed to be. And Saturn return is going to help kind of recalibrate that if you've lost insight. Notice what house your Saturn was in your birth chart. That's going to point to a lot of what area of life those lessons will kind of pop up for you and can give you clarity on what's going to come up when you have your Saturn returns. I am so glad you listened to my little take on this. If you've had yours, I'd love to hear more insight on what happened to you and your Saturn return. Thank you for being here. See you soon.